talks spells doom in the region. Would the world salvage the historic nuclear deal this time?
It is a step away from the specter of conflict and towards the possibility of peace.
In 2015, Iran and 6 other world powers emerged out of months of negotiation. The result? A historic nuclear deal with Iran. Formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. For years, Iran's efforts to build a nuclear weapon bothered everyone. This deal came as a breather for the world. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities, and in return, its crippling economic sanctions were lifted. All was well until this happened. US President Donald Trump felt that the deal did not go far enough. So in May 2018, he decided to walk away from it. A belligerent Trump was cornering Iran with sanctions. But a defiant Tehran was pushing back. Caught in the crossfire was the nuclear deal. Iran stepped up enrichment, Trump doubled down on the sanctions. So when Joe Biden entered the White House, what he encountered were the remnants of a failed deal. A deal he had helped clinch 5 years back. Iran was hopeful. Biden said he was willing to talk. He promised to rejoin the deal if Iran returned to compliance. Both sides want a deal. Getting there is the tough part. So the world powers are back in Vienna again. After a hiatus of almost 5 months, both sides remain optimistic and are rushing to salvage the deal.
The Iranian delegation represents a new administration in Tehran with new and understandable political sensibilities. But they have accepted that the work done over the 6 first rounds is a good basis to build our work ahead.
The delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran is in Vienna with a firm determination to reach an agreement and is looking forward to fruitful talks.
This time, a new regime is negotiating the talks, but the signs in Vienna are like déjà vu. The United States warns of crippling sanctions, Iran drags out the talks and enriches uranium, Israel threatens war, the Europeans plead and negotiate, and the Arabs watch from the sidelines. This happened over and over again, so what's new this time? The early signals seem good. Iran says that a nuclear deal is within reach, only and only if the West shows goodwill. Iran has provided the European powers with 2 drafts on sanctions removal and nuclear commitments. Their priority remains the removal of sanctions, with economy being crucial to the Raisi regime. As for the United States, it wants Iran to comply. Washington expects Iran to return to the status quo ante and dispose of the highly enriched uranium, but says that the regime may run out of time if it continues at the same pace.
We've said it publicly that the time will come if Iran continues at this pace, where the advances they've made will make it impossible, even if we were going to go back to the JCPOA, to recapture those benefits.
So that's where things stand now. There is tacit goodwill on both sides. America and Iran want to seal the deal, but it's rarely as easy with the baggage of decades-old mistrust and hatred. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE have detected their first cases of the new Omicron variant. The United Arab Emirates reports its first case hours after Saudi Arabia detected it in a citizen coming from the North African region. Lebanon has declared a nighttime curfew for the unvaccinated ahead of the holiday seasons. The health minister called it one of the measures to stem a recent rise in infections. The Palestinian Authority is struggling to pay its public employees. High inflation and dwindling donor aid are squeezing its already decimated budget. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has replaced the country's finance minister amid economic turmoil. Erdogan loyalist Nureddin Nebati takes on the role as the lira falls to a new low. Lebanon has launched Cash Card Aid, opening registration for 2 cash assistance programs to help 700,000 vulnerable families cope with the withdrawal of subsidies. Iraq has announced the final results of October parliamentary elections. Final election results confirm victory of Muqtada al-Sadr, whose political bloc, the Sadrist movement, won a total of 73 out of 329 seats.
Qatar is facing a tough balancing act. It is playing the role of mediator in the Saudi-Lebanon crisis. The Lebanese President Michel Aoun is in the Gulf nation for talks as Beirut shifts its position from calling for the resignation of Qaddafi to seeking dialogue with Riyadh. We tell you more.
A televised remark by Lebanon's information minister has sparked a diplomatic row in the country. But what were these comments about? The war in Yemen. This is the Crown Prince's personal battle, a war he pulled his country into. So when Qaddafi called this war futile, all hell broke loose in the region. Anger over Qaddafi's comments led to further escalation. Gulf countries have isolated Lebanon. They have threatened to split its new government, withdrawing envoys and banning imports. Qaddafi himself has now resigned, with the information minister saying that his resignation will give Lebanon a chance. Qaddafi says he's putting national interests first over personal ones. But his resignation has been on the table for weeks now. This is now expected to help unlock a diplomatic crisis that has pulled Lebanon's fledgling cabinet since October.
I have decided to vacate my ministerial post, but I will continue to serve my country wherever I may be. Up to the government I'm resigning from.
The expected breakthrough coincided with a visit to the Gulf by French President Emmanuel Macron, who is spearheading international efforts to help Lebanon out of its worst ever economic crisis. It is important to note that Lebanon-Saudi relations have not been good since 2016. This was when President Michel Aoun was elected. The reason was his alliance with Hezbollah. We found it hard to stomach the influence of Hezbollah, especially in a country in which the kingdom has invested heavily. Even Qatar has jumped into the crisis. The Gulf nation is playing the role of mediator in the crisis. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun met with the Emir of Qatar as the Saudi blockade continues to batter the economy. The Saudis know what they don't want, that is growing Iranian influence in Lebanon, but they don't know what to do about it. Saudi Arabia's Gulf allies are uniting, hitting Lebanon with punitive measures. But many are asking what the endgame is. Currently, Riyadh has shown how it can really disturb Lebanon. So one might expect things to cool down soon. Many Lebanese fear they will be the ones paying the price for a historic rivalry which has torn West Asia apart for years. For now, Lebanon remains caught in a regional rivalry, one that could speed up its economic freefall. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
There is less than a year for the FIFA World Cup, the biggest sporting festival. Hosting it is Qatar. But investigations revealed that the Gulf nation has won its hosting rights using a spy, an allegation that could now taint the legacy of football. We tell you more.
Gigantic, futuristic, and rising out of the desert. These stadiums are impossible to miss. Everywhere you turn in Qatar, there's a new one. Qatar is preparing for football's biggest festival, the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Less than a year from now, these stadiums will be packed with fans rooting for their favourites. It is the first World Cup to be held in West Asia, the biggest event to take place in the Arab world, and Qatar is leaving no stone unturned. It is using the tournament to showcase its rise from a small pearl diving enclave to a Gulf metropolis. But how did Qatar win the bid to host the biggest sporting event in the world? An Associated Press investigation says it spied. Qatar is said to have employed a former CIA officer to help spy on key officials and rival bids.
There's been allegations made throughout the years about bribes being paid to FIFA officials so that FIFA would award the cup to Qatar. There's been questions about Qatar's use of foreign workers to build the infrastructure.
Qatar won the rights to host the World Cup in 2010. It beat off rival bids from countries like United States, Australia, South Korea and Japan. It was a move to take the World Cup to new lands. But was it a fair one to begin with? The FIFA is an insular body, often criticized for its lack of transparency. The vote even took place amid accusations of corruption. Now an investigation suggests that Qatar sought an edge to secure the rights by spying. They hired former CIA officer turned private contractor Kevin Chalker. He to have spied on rival team bids, even on officials who voted to pick the winner.
Our investigation found that some of the techniques that Chalker discussed using included setting up a fake Facebook profile of an attractive young woman to try and get a target to talk to them.
Both Qatar and FIFA have declined to comment. Chalker has responded to the claims, saying that he would not ever engage in illegal surveillance. But the investigation now raises new questions.
It goes beyond just Chalker and Qatar and FIFA. There's concern about the whole ecosystem of former U.S. intelligence and military officials going to work for foreign governments, particularly in the Gulf.
Controversies shrouding the Qatar World Cup are not new. From deaths of migrant workers to rampant corruption, the allegations just don't stop. But the FIFA, which claims to protect human rights across football, seems to have turned a blind eye to this. Football is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Outside stadiums, it holds immense power. And with that power comes immense responsibility. But away from screaming fans and world-class players, it remains complicit in human rights violations. Qatar 2022 is not the first World Cup engulfed in controversy. Records suggest it will not be the last one. As fans throng the stadiums for football's biggest festival, will these allegations taint the legacy of football? West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
No statistical explosion on the surface, but a general sense of vulnerability is increasing and the number of unsolved deaths is rising. Women in Turkey say they feel more vulnerable to violence since the country denounced the only international treaty meant to protect them. We bring you the story.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a man who is obsessed with the past. But his fascination with the past does not end with him. He is dragging his country along to a backward and conservative past. At the start of July, Erdogan pulled Turkey out of a landmark treaty. Ironically enough, it is called the Istanbul Convention. What does it talk about? 3 specific things: ending domestic violence and violence against women, protecting survivors, and punishing perpetrators. Basically, it is a broad treaty that protects women from abuse. Turkey was actually the first country to sign it in 2012. 34 others followed. So why is Erdogan walking away from a deal that his country pioneered? Officially, there is no explanation. They say the Istanbul Convention is eroding conservative values, promoting divorce and recognizing homosexuality. Some say it is a threat to the traditional family structure. While there is no statistical explosion on the surface, Turkey's women remain fearful. Unexplained deaths are on the rise in the country, and the brutal killing of a female architect has sparked outrage.
The Istanbul Convention is important. Why are so many women dying? Because of the lack of proper investigation and prosecution. This was one of the key articles of the Istanbul Convention, which called for a proper investigation to be carried out each time to find out what is happening to women.
410 women were killed in Turkey last year. 345 have been killed so far this year. At a time when laws should be strengthened, the Turkish president is repealing them. And the women of the country have taken to the streets. They marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, protesting against Turkey's withdrawal from the treaty, but clashes erupted when the police tried to shut it down.
We are here because the Istanbul Convention is not implemented. So we are here to say no to femicide. Every day hundreds of thousands of women are killed, let alone women. These killings have come to children now. We are gathered here not to grieve, but rather to revolt.
Thousands marched to Istanbul's Taksim Square, blocked off with barriers amid a heavy police presence. The police fired tear gas and scuffled with protesters after urging the crowd to disperse. The convention was designed to protect women. If conventions don't matter, if laws don't matter, then what should citizens fall back on? Such treaties are signed for a reason, to create a common response to a common problem. Pulling out from such a treaty is indeed a step back, no matter how much Erdogan tries to spin it. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Winter is coming, but for Yemen, this is in the country's coffin. Thousands of displaced people in the camps have nowhere to go. They are living with minimal resources as fleeing families now face a desert winter. We bring you the story.
Crammed into a desert tent with others, Heya fears the onset of winter. If the long grinding war wasn't enough, sub-zero temperatures now threaten him and his family. Habia was forced to flee to the city of Marib after clashes escalated the outskirts of the city. The family of 9 escaped their homes overnight with nothing but 2 blankets.
We fled to this area, which is a desert, as you can see. It's part of the empty quarter desert. If any emergency occurs, we do not find the means to be transported to the nearest hospital.
There are no humanitarian services, no schools, no hospitals, or any other services. Only a cluster of makeshift tents with thousands of displaced people. Al Somia has witnessed an influx of thousands of displaced people, with hundreds of people arriving in a month. The camp, with scant resources, bears testament to a conflict that has forced millions from their homes. Marib had around 30,000 inhabitants before the war, but its population ballooned to hundreds of thousands as Yemenis fled frontline cities for its relative stability. But with about 139 camps for the displaced, hosting around 2.2 million people, many civilians are in the line of fire once again.
We were displaced 2 or 3 times and did not receive any humanitarian aid. We are 4 or 5 families living in one tent. We did not receive any blankets nor mattresses. The cold weather is about to kill us and we have no one to help us but God.
Yemen is one step away from a famine. The war has killed thousands, leaving behind a conflict-ridden nation where 80% of the population depends on aid. The UN calls it the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So where does this end? The UN is still nursing hopes of a ceasefire. But why would the Houthis take the bait, especially since they are gaining on Marib? As for the Saudis, this is the Crown Prince's personal battle, a war he pulled his country into. This to and fro will likely continue. In the end, one will emerge victorious. But the question is, will they still have a country left to rule? West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
West Asia is not without its share of culture, beauty and oddities. This is why in our next segment, Curiosities, we bring you some heartwarming stories from the region. That's all we on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I'm Ghadi Francis coming to you from Lebanon, and you're watching WION The World is One.